Tonight we are in week 2 of our series, Paradox. And I realized as we finished up last week, I'm like, I didn't really set the stage for why are we calling this series Paradox? What does this even mean? And so I want to do that tonight. As defined by Merriam-Webster's dictionary, okay, paradox means this: a statement or a sentiment that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense, and yet is perhaps true. When we say paradox in the context of this series, we're talking about how two things seem as if they shouldn't be true at the same time, and yet, in God's economy, somehow they are. We see this all throughout Scripture. These ideas that seem at war with each other, they are at conflict with each other, and yet they are still true at the same time. And Romans 9 through 11 is full of this tension, this paradox of things that feel like they are at odds with each other, and yet they are true at the same time. It's this idea that God is completely sovereign, and yet people are fully responsible. Those two ideas feel at war with each other. How can God be completely sovereign and people be completely responsible at the same time? God is completely merciful, and yet we still have to choose to respond. Grace is free, and yet it costs us everything. Like, these are paradoxes, and Romans 9 through 11 loves to live in that tension. And so a quick recap, if you weren't here last week or you forgot what we talked about, Romans 9 was Paul zooming way out in this conversation, okay? He's wrestling with the faithfulness of God in history, with his own people, Israel. They had everything, right? They had the covenants, they had the scriptures, they had the promises, they had the Messiah right there in front of them. Jesus is presented to them, and yet they still consistently chose to reject him. And so Paul is wrestling with this. We see at the beginning of chapter 9, he has this deep sorrow, this grief about this idea. Man, the truth is right there. It's right there in front of them, and yet for so many, they are choosing to reject it. And so in chapter 9, Paul is not standing at a whiteboard trying to answer the question, like, how does predestination work? What is election? Paul is wrestling with and then presenting, hey, has God failed? Can God be trusted? And his answer is a very hopeful yet hard no. God has not failed. It gives us hope because he begins to explain what God has done and God's character and how all this stuff works, that God is faithful. He has always, from the beginning of time, worked through mercy, not merit. It has never been about what we could do or what we could earn. In God's economy, it has always been about the mercy that he gives us. Salvation has never been something that we could earn, something that we could control. And that idea feels paradoxical, yet Scripture continues to support this idea over and over. And so Paul does this thing where he refuses to let theology just stay abstract, right? Like, it can't just be theoretical. You have to begin to put it into practice. If you're going to read the writing of Paul, if you're going to follow his example and what he says, it's like, we're not just having a conversation. Like, it has to make its way into your heart and into your life. And so if Romans 9 asks the question, can God be trusted? Romans 10 begins to shift and say, hey, if salvation is really this close, if salvation is right here, then how come so many people keep missing it? And I think we could ask the same question today. Like, why do people keep missing it? Even people inside the church, people in this room, how come we keep missing what it is that God is offering to us? And so we're going to jump in. Paul opens the chapter like this, Romans chapter 10, verse 1. Dear brothers and sisters, the longing of my heart and my prayer to God is for the people of Israel to be saved. Paul is not writing some detached theological idea. He is a pastor that is very concerned, right? He's writing to the church in Rome. He's talking about his people. He feels the weight of responsibility because they are not turning their heart to the Messiah and to Jesus. And so he's saying, hey, I long for, my prayer to God is for the people of Israel to be saved. This is someone who loves people that don't yet love Jesus. Verse 2 continues. I know what enthusiasm they have for God. That sounds good, right? They have enthusiasm for God. This is a positive thing, Paul. Why are you upset? I know what enthusiasm they have for God, but it is misdirected zeal. That should actually give some of us pause when we hear that. Because Paul is saying clearly, hey, it's not that they don't care, right? Like they're showing up. They're doing the stuff. They're very zealous. They're excited. They're passionate. But passion isn't enough. That passion is misdirected. It's not that they're hostile towards God. The people that Paul is talking about right now that don't yet know Jesus, they are not against God. It's just their zeal and their passion is pointed in the wrong direction, which means that you can be deeply committed to something and be deeply wrong at the same time if your zeal is pointed in the wrong direction. Paul explains in verse 3, for they don't understand God's way of making people right with himself. Refusing to accept God's way, they cling to their own way of getting right with God by trying to keep the law. That phrase, they cling to their own way. This is like the human experience, right? We cling to stuff all the time. We cling to what we can manage. We cling to what we can control. We cling to what is predictable. We cling to what is comfortable. Like we cling to systems where our effort equals outcome, right? That's predictable. If I put in a certain amount of effort, I'm going to get this outcome. I like that. It's predictable. It's comfortable. Those are the things that we hold on to, and yet God's way threatens that. It threatens that comfort. It says, hey, it's actually not about your effort. It's not about what you have done. It never was. And so you can try as hard as you want, but if your zeal, if your passion is pointed in the wrong direction, you can be deeply passionate and still be deeply wrong at the same time. Because God's way is grace, and grace strips us of our leverage. Because grace says, hey, it doesn't matter how hard you tried or how much you fail. Because grace is giving us a gift that we did not earn and we do not deserve. And so it strips us of our leverage, our position, our performance. It takes all of those things away. Grace says, hey, you don't get to negotiate. You don't get to say, yeah, but God, I did these things. Like you don't get to compare yourself. You don't get to point to your track record. Grace only points to one thing. It points to the cross. It points to what Christ has done for us. And if we're honest sometimes, this is for people who say they believe in Jesus and people who don't. Specifically people who say they believe in Jesus. A lot of times religious systems are more comfortable. If I read my Bible 7 days a week, I'm a better Christian. If I pray 15 minutes before I leave the house, God likes me more. We but we do it. We do that. We act like that. We even have conversations with our people of like, man, I really should be. We should all over each other, right? I should be reading more. I should be in the Word more. I should be praying more. I should be going to church more. I shouldn't be doing this thing. I shouldn't be doing that thing, because we are convinced and we live like, even if we won't say it out loud, we live like our performance actually matters. And that is the thing that earns us something. It earns us God's nearness, His closeness, His favor. And Paul is saying, hey, you can shoulda all over the place and still be completely wrong. This is the paradox. And it's also not in my notes, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is the paradox because on one hand, our performance doesn't matter. And on the other hand, Scripture is very clear. There should be a response to what Christ has done to us and done for us. Our response should be out of love. And so we should do those things. We absolutely should desire intimacy. We absolutely should pray. We should spend time with God. We should pursue all of these things. Absolutely. But that is a response. Because of what Christ has already done, it is not an effort in order to earn what Christ is offering. And that's the paradox. Because we can't put our weight or our value in, or our merit based on our performance, and yet, as we're going to see, there absolutely should be this expression of in our life because of what Christ has done for us. Okay, let's keep going. Paul keeps going, verse 4. For Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. As a result, all who believe in him are made right with God. Now, Paul's not trashing the law. He's saying the law had one purpose. We've seen this all throughout Romans. We talked about this last semester. The law had one job. The law's job was to reveal our brokenness. It was to show us how we don't measure up. The law was there simply to reveal the sin in our life. And trying to save yourself by the law, trying to work it up and say, hey, I'm good enough, trying to save yourself by the law is trying to use an x-ray to fix a broken bone. Right? The x-ray shows you have a broken bone, but it can't actually do anything to fix it. That's what the law is. The law is the x-ray that says, hey, there is something broken here. Now you have awareness, but the law can't actually do anything to make you better. And then Paul begins to talk about two different kinds of righteousness. We have righteousness by the law. Righteousness by the law says that you need to do more, you need to perform, you need to achieve. And then we have righteousness by faith that simply says trust, believe, receive, surrender. And now Paul is going to begin to quote Moses from Deuteronomy 30. He's saying, hey, righteousness by faith doesn't talk the same way that righteousness by the law does. Check it out, verses 5-7. For Moses writes that the law's way of making a person right with God requires obedience to all of its commands, which is impossible, by the way. But faith's way of getting right with God says, hey, don't say in your heart who will go up to heaven to bring Christ down to earth, and don't say who will go down to the place of the dead to bring Christ back to life. Again, Paul is saying, hey, you don't have to figure out how to get up to heaven, get God's attention, and get him to come engage. Like, he already did that. Jesus has already come down from heaven. And the law has displayed our brokenness. It has displayed our sin. Sin leads to death. There is a cost and a penalty for our sin, and that is death. Sin leads to death. The wages of sin is death. We don't have to figure out how to pay that debt, because Christ has already done that for us as well. And that's what he's saying. And he's saying, hey, check this out. Before Jesus ever came, Moses knew, back in Deuteronomy, Moses knew that the law was not the thing, that there was something else long before Jesus ever came. Moses knew it was about more than just keeping the law, and God did everything that was required. Verse 8. In fact, it says, he's quoting Moses from Deuteronomy 30, he's talking about is the law. In fact, it says, the message is very close at hand. It is on your lips and in your heart, and that message is the very message about faith that we preach. This is the heartbeat of Romans 10. Salvation is near. It's not hidden. It's not a secret. Like, God didn't create some salvation escape room where you have to figure out like the secret codes and unlock some hidden doors. Like, it's not some crazy secret thing. Salvation is right here. It's closer than your next breath. He brought it close enough that we could speak to it, close enough that we could trust it, close enough that we could respond to it. And then the next verse, Romans 10:9, will sound familiar if you've been in church before, but don't miss what it's saying. If you openly declare Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now, when we hear this verse, we have to put ourselves back where they were when they heard this verse, okay? Original audience is a Roman audience. And when he uses this language and he says, hey, to say Jesus is Lord, this is a declaration of allegiance. Like, they're not just sitting in church on a Wednesday night being like singing songs like Jesus is Lord, woohoo, yeah. No, this is like a big deal because there was only one Lord in Rome, and that was Caesar. And so to say anyone else was Lord was blasphemy, right? Like, it could cost you your life. And so when Paul says, hey, you need to profess, you need to declare Jesus is Lord, the word he uses is kurios for Lord. It's a Greek word, and it's a Greek translation used in the Old Testament to describe, for God's name, Yahweh. It's the Greek translation of Yahweh, kurios. It's saying, hey, he is the supreme leader. You know who else used this word to describe themselves? Caesar. Caesar used this same word to say, hey, I am supreme ruler. I am the leader. And so Paul is saying, hey, you have to make this decision. Who is going to be boss in your life? Who are you proclaiming your allegiance to? This was no like, yeah, on Sundays and Wednesdays, Jesus is Lord. This was a life-altering thing. You're making a decision who you're proclaiming your allegiance to. And then he uses this other language. You have to believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. In order to believe that he was raised from the dead, you first must believe that he died, right? So there's this awareness and this acceptance. Sin, broken, separation. Because I have sinned, because I am broken, there's a separation that exists between me and God. And so God sent Jesus to come and take my place, and he died to pay the penalty for my sin. And then God rose him back to life from the dead. God brings things back to life from death. And so you basically are saying like, hey, I accept and align my heart and myself with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, with the finished work of the cross. And then Paul clarifies in Romans 10:10, for it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. Confessing with your mouth and believing in your heart are not two different acts. They're two sides of the same coin. Tim Keller says it like this. In other words, to confess with my mouth is simply part of believing with my heart. They both mean to profess faith in Christ. Anyone who does believe expresses this belief. This is part of the paradox I was talking about earlier. It shows up in our life. When we align our heart, when we profess our allegiance and we align our heart and say, hey, Jesus is Lord, I'm professing my allegiance to him, it begins to show up in our life. It begins to show up in the way that we act. Verse 12, there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and generously gives his riches to all who call on him. Paul is reminding the Roman church, and he's reminding anyone who will listen, hey, this is available to anyone. There's no difference between Jew or Gentile, Jew, non-Jew, when it comes to either the necessity of or the availability of salvation. And then he says that God gives generously, like he's not withholding, he's not holding back. He gives generously to those who call on him. Next, Paul is going to quote from Joel 2:32 in verse 13 when he says, for everyone, he's saying, hey, everyone, Jew, Gentile, religious, irreligious, good, bad, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord, those who recognize who Jesus is, those who pledge their allegiance, they declare their allegiance, they call him Lord. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. They will be justified. They will be made right with God, not because of anything they do, not because they have earned anything, but because of what Christ has done for them. The only thing that needs to be done is the only thing we can do. Declare Jesus is Lord. Calling on the name of the Lord. How do we do that? Paul keeps going, verse 14. How can they call on him to save unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? Like the only way that someone can believe these things, the only one that someone can make the decision to align their heart and their life and to declare allegiance to Christ is if someone tells them in the first place, right? Like they have to hear it. But Paul's not just talking about like physical hearing. It's deeper than that. It has to get inside of you. Like you have to hear it at a deeper level. It has to make its way to your heart. Just reading the Bible does not bring salvation. So it's not just, oh, I heard it with my ears. Like you have to experience the truth of the gospel and what is being presented to you. But how can someone hear unless somebody tells them, right? The truth of the gospel must be communicated. It's communicated with our words. It's communicated with our life. The word that Paul uses here for telling is chariso. It means to be a herald. Okay? And that's a weird word we don't use a whole lot. But chariso, a herald, is to make an announcement. This is not just like a sermon that somebody stands on the stage and preaches. Like this word of going and telling is heralding, is letting people know what it is that God has said, who it is that God has declared himself to be, how God has shown up in your life. You are declaring it. You're taking it to the streets. And verse 15 starts like this. And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? Someone must do the communicating. But here's the good news, or maybe the bad news. All of us have been sent. Like Christ has already sent all of us in Matthew 28, where he says, hey, go make disciples. That's the mission. The Great Commission is that we come alongside on the mission of what Christ came to do and say, hey, go and tell. Like you have been sent. This isn't just missionaries. It's not just pastors. It's not just other people. God sent all people. And this is where Romans 10 moves from comfortable to very uncomfortable very fast. Salvation is near, but it must be heard. Grace is free, but it must be proclaimed. Like we have a responsibility, which means, check this out, our silence has consequences. Like there is weight to us not going. There is weight to us not declaring. Like our silence has consequences. Verse 15 finishes, how beautiful are the feet of the messengers who bring good news. And notice what Paul is doing and how he's talking about evangelism here. Hey, it's absolutely necessary. Evangelism is absolutely necessary. How can they believe if they have never heard? And so it is part of our response to the gospel to then turn around and share that with other people because we have been sent. It requires willingness to share both with our words and with our lives. And it requires sacrifice to go. Now, I promise you that I did not prearrange this, okay? But that is what things like Beach Reach give you the opportunity to practice in response. And it may be going on a mission trip, right? I really genuinely believe that some of you in this room need to say yes. And it is the scariest thing, and you're like, there's no way I could do that. You're right. Do it anyway. Do it scared. But here's the other thing. It may be going on a mission trip. It may be going across the hall. It may be going 2 chairs down in the class from where you normally sit and having a conversation. And maybe walking over to the next table at the coffee shop, okay? This is not just big, grand gestures of us going to some faraway place or getting on an airplane or in a van and traveling to another city or country. This is an obedience and a sacrifice that says, hey, I am willing to go. I'm making myself available. And Paul keeps going, verse 16. Here's the hard part. Not everyone welcomes the good news. Just because we go doesn't mean everybody's going to accept it. But how can they believe if they've never heard? So we have to make a decision. And Paul ends the chapter with this haunting image, verse 21. All day long I opened my arms to them, but they were disobedient and rebellious. God is not distant. He's not hiding. He's definitely not indifferent. His arms are open. The invitation has been extended, and yet people still resist. Some people reject, and it's not because grace is unclear. It's because surrender is hard. Surrender will cost you something. Declaring your allegiance to Jesus means that you don't get to look like everybody else. You don't get to walk like everybody else. Allegiance. Jesus is Lord. Not Jesus is my homeboy. Not Jesus is my bro. Jesus is my Lord. I am aligning my heart and my life. I'm declaring my allegiance to him as the king, as the supreme ruler in my life. And sacrifice is the only acceptable response. It will cost us everything. What do we do with this as we get ready to close? Some of you in this room maybe need to surrender for the first time. You've never actually declared that Jesus is Lord. Not just with your lips, but with your heart. You've heard the word, but you've never heard the word. You never let it get down inside of you and say, man, this is actually going to impact and change who I am for the rest of my life. The trajectory of my life is going to be completely different because I am making the decision to pledge my allegiance to someone new. And maybe for some of you tonight, that's the step that you need to take to recognize that sin is brokenness. There's a perfect God that desires a loving relationship with you. And because of our stupidity and stubbornness and selfishness, we have created this huge void and this huge gap. And yet God loves us so much that he sent his son to take our place, and he paid the penalty for our sin. He died in our place so that we don't have to. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And maybe tonight you need to say, I accept that gift and I declare that Jesus is my Lord. But for the people in the room who have made the decision to surrender to Jesus, Romans 10 doesn't leave you alone. There's a response that it calls us to. And so here are a couple of things, quick bullet points. Here's the first thing. Check what you're clinging to. I said at the beginning, they clung to, they held on to these things, and they convinced themselves that this is what created nearness or rightness or justification. They clung to, what is it that you are clinging to? Are you clinging to your morality? Are you clinging to your church attendance? Are you clinging to maybe some old habits and patterns that you need to let go of? Those things make terrible saviors. They cannot do anything for you. What is it that you are clinging to? And here's the second thing. You have to move your belief just from theoretical, and you have to make it personal. This is not just a good idea. This is not just something we talk about. This is something we put into action. It requires response from us. It requires sacrifice. It requires obedience. How do we move it from just something that we think is a good idea and that we would even say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but it's still just this theoretical idea and it hasn't really taken root where we have applied it to our life and it influences everything. And so the question is not, hey, do you agree with everything? The question is, do you trust? It's not, do you have all the answers? It's, do you believe that God is who he says that he is? And for some of us, that's really, really hard to reconcile, and I get it. And that's a process and a journey, and you may not be there yet, but at some point it has to move. It's not a religious system. It's a relationship. It has to move from theoretical to personal. Here's the next one. Third, use your voice. Paul ties salvation to confession. It's not because words save. Check this out. Our allegiance shows up in the way that we talk. Who in your life knows that you're a follower of Jesus? Or maybe a more convicting question, who doesn't? Who in your life doesn't know? Not even just because of what you say, but because of how you live. Who needs to? Who have you been sent to? And what are the spaces that you have been sent into to be the light in the darkness, to carry Jesus with you wherever you go? You have to use your voice. How will they believe if they've never heard? And how will they hear unless someone tells them? Here's the fourth thing. Go before you feel ready. It's not about getting it all. It's not about having all the answers and feeling all the right things and being able to say all the right things and answer every question. It is about going even when you're scared. Do it scared. Go before you feel ready. You don't need a script. You need presence. You need obedience. And here's the last thing. Stop treating grace like it's far away. A lot of times we distract ourselves with our striving and our behavior because we are convinced that salvation and grace is far away and we have to work up to getting closer to it so then we can go be obedient to what it is that God has called us to do. Grace is not far away. It is near. Salvation is near. What Christ offers is near. It is right here. It is available to you. And so quit trying to earn it. Believe that you have already received it if you have declared and put your allegiance to Jesus, declaring your allegiance to Jesus. Recognize that grace and salvation are near to you. So the question is not, has God come close? The question is whether you receive what he offers, or are you clinging to your own way? Let's pray.